Pension, you got modernity, you got conservatism, you got your tax cuts, you got your business deregulation, you got your consumerism, you got your flappers, you got your gin joints, you got your illegal booze, you got your gangsters shooting it up. You got people losing their freaking minds over evolution being taught in Tennessee. You got Alice Paul still out there fighting for an equal rights amendment, by the way. She's still out there. And then all of a sudden it comes to a screeching halt. The debate, the jazz, the tax cuts, all of the consumerism, it all comes to a grinding, screeching halt with the Depression in 1929. So the question is always, well, what caused it? Well, I see four things here. The question writes itself, doesn't it? All of the following are causes of the Great Depression, except there are four things here. There you go. Learn how to write questions. Industrial overproduction. I talked about that. The point of diminishing returns. The point where factories are making more crap than people are going to buy. So you've got warehouses filling up with stuff nobody's going to buy because there's no market for it. Everybody's bought the car, the waffle iron, the heated towel rack, whatever it is they're going to buy, they've bought it. The only new purchases are replacement purchases. And if you want to sell it overseas, good luck, because high tariffs. So you don't have a market for those overseas goods. Farmers could have told you those high tariffs were a problem back in 1922. It took the industrial sector about 7 years to figure that out. Speculation in the stock market. What does it mean to speculate?
To buy a lot with the intent of turning around and selling it for
Exactly.
profit.
You are guessing. You are making a guess. You're spec. Seeing. You're trying to look into the future and predict that the stock is going to do better in the future than it has done in the past. I will put my money there and hopefully make some money off of it, sell the stock, pocket the profit, pay off the initial investment. Speculation in the stock market. And that, with that comes overextended debt. People buying stock on margin. People borrowing money to buy stock with the belief that they would make money off the stock market and be able to pay back the initial loan. Also, in terms of debt, what else are people going into debt over? Nothing. What are they going into debt over? What are they buying? Too much stuff. Exactly. Cars, homes, things, trinkets, doodads. They're borrowing money left and right to buy this stuff. There is a credit bubble out there. Too many people have borrowed money to buy stuff they cannot afford and do not need. But that's what drives the economy. And the fact that banks had no reserve cash on hand. If there was a panic and people bum rushed the bank on any given day and pulled their money out of the bank, there was no reserve cash on hand to keep that bank afloat. Well, it's fine so long as nobody decides to rush the bank on any given day. What winds up happening is that the top investors are looking at the information. They're looking at sales. They're looking at projected sales, and they make the decision early on that they're going to dump their stock. When they dump their stock, everybody sees that the wise men have dumped their stock. They start to dump their stock, And when they start to dump their stock, the neighbor says, holy crap, they're dumping their stock. I better dump my stock. And it literally is a psychological panic. Well, they're doing it, I have to do it. People panic, they sell off their stock, market values crash, and people who were depending on making money off of stocks to pay back their debts now cannot pay back their debts. Did we do this? We did this.
A little bit.
We looked at the stock market crash. We looked at buying on margin.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we did buying on margin. Great. So this basically explains the concept of buying on margin, borrowing money from a broker to buy stock. You're borrowing money to buy stock. At its worst, you only had to pony up 10% of the total value. Think about that. At its worst, you're borrowing 90%. And when you can't pay that back, when that stock crashes, when that stock is now going for pennies on the dollar, and you owe 90% of the value of that stock, you got to liquidate everything. You got to sell everything. Your cars, your waffle irons, your heated towel racks, your BVD shirts, your Model T Ford, your house. You got to sell it all. You got to turn it into liquid assets and pay off the banks. And guess what? The banks aren't going to get all their money. The brokerage houses aren't going to get all their money back. People don't have that kind of cash lying around. So the stocks crash. People go bankrupt. Banks fail. When banks fail, they can't lend out money. So no payroll, no business expansion, no mortgages, no insurance, no nothing. When the banks grind to a halt, when the banks close, that essentially is the heart of the economy, and the heart has stopped. Money is the lifeblood of the economy. It's the grease. It's the oil in the engine. It keeps the engine going. When you run out of cash, the blood stops flowing. The grease stops the engine. There's no more grease in the engine. There's no more oil in the engine. And you wind up with this. You wind up with previously upstanding middle-class people who are reduced to living in shanty towns. They're called bums. Get out of here. We don't want your kind around here. We don't want you stinking up the joint. Oh, my God, you used to be a member of the Elks Club? Oh, well, gee whiz, I'm sorry you fell on hard times, but we still don't want your kind around here. And people who had previously had great middle-class lives find themselves in this kind of environment, what they called Hoovervilles. Poor old Herbert Hoover had been elected in 1928 promising prosperity as far as the eye can see, a chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. And this is what happens on his watch. Did Herbert Hoover cause this? No. But he's the guy sitting in the big chair when it happens. So he gets the blame. Fair, unfair, doesn't matter. And then you've got the Dust Bowl on top of it, which drags farmers down even further. You've got this drought out in the middle of the country in the Midwest, and that's causing a disruption of people because people are having to leave their farms in Kansas and Iowa and Arkansas and Oklahoma. You've got this massive drought. And the soil in the Midwest is unarable. It can't be used. So you wind up with a lot of people leaving their farms. A lot of them left Oklahoma and Arkansas. They're called Okies and Arkies, for the promise of work in California. Now, hopefully, if you're watching Grapes of Wrath, hopefully you've read the damn thing, but if you're watching Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck is trying to convey how miserable life was like for the migrant farm workers of the 1930s. It causes a mass movement of people around the country looking for work. I mean, the Depression and the Dust Bowl are like a 1-2 punch to the American economy. They just happen at the same time. Yeah.
I'm not trying to say it was all orchestrated by big business in California, but didn't they have all these flyers, and then there's a whole influx of people, and then they can pay them pennies on the dollar.
That's exactly it. Cheap labor. There you go. Maybe you, and I'm just paraphrasing of Mice and Men, maybe they've got enough work for 500 people. So they give out 10,000 flyers. And people show up in droves. Maybe 5,000 people show up for 500 jobs. They can pay them whatever they want.
Bread.
So, yeah, it's supply and demand, baby. Supply and demand. 2 cents a bushel. Picking peaches. 2 cents a bushel. And you're happy to have it. And you've got all these people who are in squatter camps and bum camps and things like that. People who had previously been upstanding members of society now see themselves on the other end. A lot of people turned to movies in the 1920s and 30s as a form of escapism. There are a lot of comedies, there are a lot of musicals, there are a lot of feel-good movies in the 1930s. Try to get people's minds off of the Depression. But how does Hoover respond? What does he do? Look, we have had depressions before. We had a real estate bubble in 1819, the Panic of 1819. We had a depression in 1837. We had a panic in 1857. We had the crime of 73, the demonetization of silver, the panic of 1873 and depression of 1875. You had the depression of 1893. You had the panic of 1907. There's Teddy Roosevelt, hat in hand, going to J.P. Morgan. Buddy, can you spare a dime? Help the government float itself again? We have had depressions and panics before. And what has the government response been? Let me ask it another way. Did Martin Van Buren do anything extraordinary to help people during the Depression of 1837? Nope. He just divorced American banking from the private banking system. Divorce bill. In 1873, did the federal government do anything to help out poor people during the panic and recession of 1873, 4, 5, 6? No. In 1893, Jacob Coxey and his army of farmers and industrial workers marched to Washington, D.C. and demand that Grover Cleveland provide jobs to the poor people of America. What's Cleveland's response? What was Cleveland's response to Coxey's army? Troops! That's what I think of poor people. Screw them! We're not going to do anything to provide direct relief to people. We're going to let it play out. We're going to let it happen. That has been the standard response to every economic downturn in American history up to 1929. Let it play out. Do not interfere. It will correct itself. It has. Until this one. Hoover is facing the greatest economic calamity America has ever faced. By 1932, 1 in 4 Americans is unemployed. 1 in 4 people are out of work. Hoover does what he thinks, and you got to remember, Hoover is going with, what the previous 31 guys have done. So he's got that legacy. Hey, businesses, maybe don't lay off so many workers. He tries to persuade businesses not to lay off workers. Please don't lay off any more workers. Maybe we can build, hey, I know how to build hydroelectric dams. Why don't we build some hydroelectric dams? Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, that'll put some people to work. But I mean, if you've got 1 in 4 people out of a job, how many hydroelectric dams you plan on building? Hoover realizes that he needs to do something different. And so Hoover is going to provide direct aid to businesses and banks in a way that Van Buren, Grant, Cleveland, Roosevelt would never have done. What Hoover's about to do is extraordinarily radical for an American president. It is called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And basically what it is a bailout. It's a bailout to banks, a bailout to businesses, a bailout to insurance companies, a bailout to mortgage companies. Sound familiar? What about the individual person? What about the poor slob who's out of a job and needs work? Hoover's attitude is, they'll figure it out. He emphasizes rugged individualism. Your neighbors will take care of you. The church will take care of you. So he still subscribes to this orthodoxy, traditional view. Hoover still subscribes to this orthodoxy of the government not helping the individual. But he is willing to break with orthodoxy and try something new, which is giving direct aid to businesses and banks. That is something nobody has done. He is going to raise the tariff rate as well, the highest that the tariff has ever been. I believe at one point it went up to 70%. It's called the Hawley-Smoot tariff. And by the way, it's the last tariff you'll ever need to know. Because the Hawley-Smoot tariff not only drives the United States economy further into depression, it drives the world economy into depression. And what do we get from the Hawley-Smoot tariff? You get Hitler.
Seems like raising the tariff would be the opposite of what you would want
It's
to do.
very I mean, if you're back in the day, what is your job as the American president in an economic calamity? What's your job?
To try to get out of the economic calamity.
But mainly you're trying to protect American jobs.
Yeah.
Whatever jobs are available, you're trying to protect them. So your immediate gut instinct, which has been the gut instinct of every guy previous to this, is raise the tariff rate, keep foreign goods out, encourage people to buy American. That's the gut reaction.
But then there's nowhere to sell.
But there's nowhere to sell, and there's nobody to buy. So all you're doing by raising the tariff rate here is you're cutting off whatever market there may have been for American goods. Foreign countries aren't able to sell their goods in America. American goods aren't able to be sold overseas. So nobody's buying anything. Nobody's selling anything. And the Western world goes into depression. It is a worldwide depression. And we drug the world down with us. Hoover believed volunteers and charities could handle it. So what does this bailout look like? Because this, my friends, is radical. That's radical. That's rad. As always, my partner in crime, Pepper Brooks. Pep. Really? Hoover says that the individual is capable of handling his own affairs. It is not the function of the government to relieve individuals of their responsibility to their neighbors or to relieve private institutions of their responsibility to the public. Everybody needs to learn how to cinch up their waist. You'll get by. Hoover believed that if he gave money to the average person, that would be demeaning. So he goes with what he knows. What does the bailout do? Through the RFC, Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the federal government is going to give money, cash infusions, to banks, businesses, insurance companies, and mortgage companies. They get the money, not you. With the belief that it will trickle down to the people at the bottom. So he's trying something radical and new, but it's couched in that old Republican orthodoxy of trickle-down economics. It'll eventually reach the people at the bottom. Eventually. But what do you think the banks, the businesses, the insurance companies, and the mortgage companies did with the cash they got? They kept it. Guys, in 2009, what do you think the banks, the businesses, the mortgage companies, and the insurance companies did with the cash that the Bush and the Obama administration gave them? They kept it. Nobody learns anything. If you want the economy to function, you have got to have money in people's pockets. Whether you put it there artificially or not, you've got to have money in people's pockets. You've got to have people buy things. That's how an economy works. You can't just take, and hold on to my big pile of cash. Woo, treasure bath. Wash this. You have got to put money in people's pockets to get the wheels of the economy turning. That is the grease. That is the oil. That is the lifeblood. Hoover couldn't see past that. His vision was not big enough. He went with what he knew. That's the big difference between Hoover and Roosevelt. Roosevelt says, we got to get money in people's pockets. I don't care how we do it, but we got to get money in people's pockets. I mean, come up with something. You people, you're all smarter than me. Come up with something and give me an idea. Hoover thinks he's the smartest man in the room. He doesn't want input. He doesn't want people telling him what to do. Oh, he knows. FDR, at least, is willing to say, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I need to surround myself with smart people who will tell me what the best course of action is. That's leadership. Being the smartest man in the room is not leadership. Oh, and then, boy, I'll tell you what, in an election year, there's nothing that sets the American heart aflame more than sending the army out to attack veterans. Hoover has a tin ear. He is tone deaf. He has no concept of what life is like for the average man. He's going about business as usual at the White House, believing that if he does anything different, it will send a message of panic. Dude, we're already there. And when the World War I veterans come to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1932 and demand the bonus that they were promised from World War I, they want the bonus was supposed to be paid off in 1940. They wanted their bonus early to help, defray the problems of the Depression. So they come to Washington, D.C., these people who have served our country, given life and limb, come to Washington, D.C., and the response of Hoover is to send out General Douglas MacArthur and General Dwight D. Eisenhower to burn these veterans out. And that's the image that Herbert Hoover has to run with in 1932 for re-election. I mean, the American people look at that, and what are they thinking?
What's left, Dwight D. Eisenhower?
Eisenhower's still General MacArthur's underling in 1932. They're looking at that and they're saying, Hoover doesn't care. Hoover doesn't care about poor people. Hoover doesn't care about me. So when someone comes along and says, you have been screwed, you deserve a new deal. Yeah, I know. That's like the Republican bastion right there. I know it seems counterintuitive, but that's the Republican bastion. It's the Northeast in the 1930s. Yeah, I mean, a monkey in a suit could have run as the Democrat and would have won in a landslide in 1932. Herbert Hoover was not getting reelected. So Franklin Roosevelt, elected in a landslide with a mandate. When you win by that many states, you've got a mandate. The people have spoken. They want you to act. In the election of 1832, Hoover's talking about rugged individualism, Reconstruction finance, bailouts for businesses. The Revenue Act, he raised taxes on the wealthy. A Republican raising taxes on the wealthy. Emergency Relief Construction Act, that's your dams. Federal Home Loan Bank Act to stop foreclosures, the bonus army fiasco. He expands government, but not enough. Because he's tied too much to traditional orthodoxy, traditional methods. The difference with Roosevelt says we can have it all. He says Hoover's a spendocrat. Hoover's spending too much. We can cut deficits, cut Hoover's spending, use an active government, provide direct relief to the poor, because I'm willing to experiment. Sure tries things, but his bag of tricks is limited. Limited by his lack of vision. Roosevelt has got the vision thing. He doesn't know exactly what he's going to do. Matter of fact, when he's elected in 1932, I think he was heard to say, all right, now what? Now what do I do? He didn't have a clue. Didn't have a clue what to do in 1932 in November. Took him from November 1932 to March 1933, which is when Inauguration Day used to be, to try to figure out something. By the way, in that interim, between November 1932 and March 1933, what is that, about 5 months between the election and the inauguration? Yeah, the banks collapsed in America. And there was basically, and nobody did anything. Hoover didn't do anything because he was the outgoing president. Roosevelt couldn't do anything because he hadn't been inaugurated yet. So a lot of people in Congress said, a lot of people began to realize the time between the election and the inauguration is too long, what they called the lame duck session. So what did they do? They moved inauguration day. They did two things in 1933. 20th Amendment moves Inauguration Day to January 20th. And the 21st Amendment repeals Prohibition, not because they couldn't enforce it, but because states needed revenue. It was a revenue thing, not a law enforcement thing. The whole debate over marijuana today is not about the drug or the legalization or the failure of the war on drugs and all that stuff. It's about how much money can the state get from it. And that's why everybody's sitting back and waiting to see what happens in Colorado and Washington. Because they want to see how it plays out. They're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. The most important part of FDR's presidency is the first 100 days. He tells people in his inaugural address that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, mindless, paralyzing fear that cripples our ability to bring needed action to the places where they're needed. But guys, his number one goal is to restore confidence. Somebody's on it. Confidence is not something you can give to somebody in a gift basket. Confidence is up here. Psychological. The Depression is as much psychological as it is economic. The recovery has got to be as much psychological as it is economic. And so, he tells the American people right from the get-go, I'm going to work for you to provide relief, recovery, and reform. I am going to pump prime the economy. If you like to think about the economy as an engine, when you go to mow the grass, can you just start the mower? What's the little rubber button? You have to pump some gasoline into the engine to get it to start. That's called the primer. He's saying you need to do that with the economy. The government has to artificially inject money into the economy and get money in people's pockets. It's called pump priming the economy, and it is the idea of a guy named John Maynard Keynes. And it is pretty much the American response to every economic downturn since 1932. You find a way to pump prime money into the economy. And you may have to go into deficit in order to do it. But if you do it and you get the economy to recover, you pay the deficit back later. It's called deficit spending and pump priming. Roosevelt relied on a group of advisors he called the Brains Trust and his wife. Roosevelt was willing to listen to people. He got the top economists, the top scientists, the top sociologists. He got the top guys to come to Washington, D.C. and work for the White House. Everybody working together as a team to figure out the problem. His eyes and ears are his wife. Why? Why can't he just go out there and see what the hell's going on? Because he had polio.
Good morning, Southern. Good morning, announcements will be on shortly.
And he was willing to talk directly to the American people, or in what are known as fireside chats. He would sit there and talk to the American people in simple, plain language about what the problem was, what the government was doing, what they hoped it would solve, and how it would impact them. It is Politics 101. And by creating a group of alphabet soup agencies, AAA, CCC, TVA, CWA, PWA, WPA, NEA, NIRA, by creating all these alphabet soup agencies, Roosevelt at least gave the image that the government was doing something. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Algebra and data analysis HSA review sessions are held on Tuesdays and Wednesdays